So highlights of it, it's a partial management survey of a hospital building, and what we're going through at the moment today is just some extracts from it. So standard introduction, gives you all the results of our survey planning. A lot of the survey planning we do is remote, so because obviously we don't have an awful lot of time to actually get to site. So a lot of the time, the survey planning says it's done remote through conversations that we have with the people that we're engaged with, and email, and Google's a wonderful thing these days. You can find out loads of information on buildings. So then we've developed a database system where we record all our information. And one of the problems that we had as a company was that we've well, say problems, but one of the issues that we've had to try and overcome is a lot of the KPIs that we're under with framework agreements require us to get our surveys out under really strict time. So what we've done is we've developed an in-house database system so that we can put all the information in that's really quick. It's like the room references that we use. We generally use our own room references, so that goes through the entire report. So all the information will come through as one. We can link it in our database quite easily. Goes into the drawings, into the sample database. So it all runs together, and it means that we can get the reports out quite quickly. So I was just going to run through some of the rooms that we've surveyed and the information that we found from it all. So this first one, just a conference room. Didn't find anything there, any suspicion that we needed to take samples for. But as you we're on a tight time scale. We're trying to get through this as quickly as we possibly can. You can't get into every little nook and cranny all the time. So we generally do have a standard sort of caveat, if you like, in there to say that sometimes management surveys won't find everything that you should do. So there are some occasions where there's going to be areas that we haven't got into, so there are limitations in there that we might not necessarily be able to get hold of. So we always try and put a warning in there to say that there could be some concealed asbestos in there that we haven't found. Gets a little bit of out of our get out of jail free card sometimes, but it's necessary information that we feel as though the client needs. On the second part of it, on the second drawing, second half of it, sorry. Toilets in there, we weren't able to access everything in the ceiling, but elsewhere in the building on some of the other floors we have seen some thermal insulation debris in there. Because we can't get into this ceiling void, there's a strong possibility, or at least I thought there was a strong possibility, that there could be some thermal debris in there, because you can see pipes running through. So as a presumption, we've put that in there to say that it could be there. And obviously things like thermal, clients need to take interest in that and do something with it fairly quickly. Changed. So next couple of rooms. Again, we're on the second floor now, so you can see that the room references are carried on. So it'll make our life easier. Again, you've got another ceiling void there that we've not been able to get into. So we've presumed thermal insulation. The other office on the second side, not really much information to go into that one. So again, we haven't taken any samples, so there's nothing really to report on our point of view. But you've always got that problem of being concealed areas where we've just not been able to get into. So we're now onto the third floor. Again, these are two rooms fairly similar to all the others that we've been into. Again, we've looked at them, gone as far as we possibly can. We've still got that issue recommendation to go in for areas where it's possibly concealed or unlisted, so that people are aware of the limitations of that room. Right, we're on third floor now. Corridor, again, nothing really to report with that one. Same issues. However, the cleaner store, this is where we found the thermal debris in the ceiling. So we managed to get in there and take a sample. And that did come back as positive, got amsite chrysotile in it. Obviously, that gives you quite a high material score, so it is something that the client needs to deal with very quickly. We've put our recommendations in there, which I think you can probably make out. because obviously you need to try and remove the risk as soon as you can. So either remove it or encapsulated it. But with it being such a high material score, we thought, you need to try and get that done within a quite tight time scale. Seems to looking at around about 3 months. Again, we're still on the 3rd floor. This one, we found a couple of areas where there were door header panels. There's some AIB above them both. With it being already sealed, so you didn't really need to do much more with it, but it's got a still reasonably high material score of 6, so you do need to do something with it. So we recommended labelling and managing it. That way, at least people are going to be aware of its existence. Damn reports. So we're now still third floor. In this one, we did manage to find a column, which you can just about see it behind the toilet cubicles there, but we didn't find any asbestos on it. So that was, at least we managed to find that one. But again, same recommendations that we've got elsewhere. On the stairs, we just sampled the vinyl floor tiles on that one, and they came back as negative, so there's no action required with that one. Should point out on each of these, we do try and do a bit of a summary of what's in each room. So there is a description of the main elements of each building and each room, so you can actually see what it is. So the last 2 areas that we looked at, one was the boiler room. Again, we didn't find anything much really to sample there. There was a couple of gaskets, but because we sampled 1 or 2 of them and they came back as positive, you never quite know where they all are. So we've just recommended that they're going to be throughout, because we haven't got time to sample them all, unfortunately. And then the external building, we managed to find on some of the windows there was a bit of mastic there. So again, that came back as positive. Again, it needs to be labelled and managed so that at least people are aware of it. So that was the summary of our report. I
mean, obviously, as we said at the beginning, this is all mocked up, but we were trying to just sort of replicate some of the bits that sort of surveying companies will put in, some of the sort of like the recommendations, and on face value, I'm presuming a lot of you are probably thinking, yeah, no, that sounds quite reasonable. He's given a reasonable explanation, and the bit about sort of like the recommendations as well. We just thought then it was very useful to sort of then show it from the client's perspective, as to whether that was useful or not, whether or not there were any issues with that data, and maybe other ways of thinking about it. So I'll hand over to Joanna, which I know a number of you know Joanna already, but Joanna's the asbestos lead for Manchester Foundation Trust, which is the largest hospital trust in the UK. So has lots and lots of challenges on a daily basis as regards asbestos, as well as dealing obviously with surveying companies, analytical companies, and in-house staff as well. So I shall hand over.
Thank you. You might be surprised to hear that a lot of the examples in this report were actually from real surveys undertaken for places I've worked in the last 5 to 10 years. So some of it might seem a bit suspicious or horrendous, but a lot of it is actually true and real examples of things that we've found while doing the work. So in terms of the survey, I mean, we asked for a management survey, and another surveyor has just explained to us that they've used the room numbering system. Everything's got a unique identifier. That's what you need in a report. You're able to identify where it is. But none of these rooms are actually the room descriptions and numbers that we have on site. We have property management systems, we have CAFM systems, we have maintenance jobs that are allocated to particular room codes and references. None of these match the rooms in our building. So how do I put that information into my system and link it to the maintenance or project work that we need to do if you've not used the same numbering system that we have in place? You mentioned as well the caveat. Having read the report in its entirety, it describes at the front of the report what a management survey is. There's guidance about what exists and how far the scope of that would go. But do we need to have that comment there? For that room, you're telling me with the first phrase that you've not found anything suspicious at all. But then you put that caveat in there. So do I have any faith that you've actually done a management survey? We know it's a management survey. We know it's limited and not intrusive by its nature. But by putting a contradictory statement in for that room, does that destroy the faith in how I'm going to use that information? Do I think it's going to be sufficient to say to somebody doing routine maintenance in there that there isn't any asbestos? And even if there was any limitations that were valid and justified and you thought that there might be the potential for asbestos to exist there, highlight it to me specifically about what it is. You know, that's what we really need to know. And if you're giving me the information about the room there, put those limitations in the room. Don't make me go back 20 pages to the front of the report to look at the limitations section. Because when I use that report, that's what I do. I look at that room, that information. I say, OK, what do I know about that space? What asbestos is there? What do I not know about it? Make it as easy as possible for me to use that information. The second one over here as well. The room description's really great. From a management perspective, we use them all the time. If we've got quite low-level jobs, so somebody's going in, maybe just replacing the flooring or hanging a picture or some shelving on the wall, that is our bread and butter for the information that we need to be able to make that decision without doing another survey. But in here, you told me there's carpet tiles in the toilet. Are there really carpet tiles in the toilet? That's not typically what we have at hospitals. So I'm starting to question already that, is that the accurate description for that room? Can I go in there and hang a new mirror? Is that a room description that's from another room? So is it the right information for me? So this one, it's the big one. No action required, review survey limitations. If it's a genuine limitation and something that you present to risk, absolutely highlight it to me, but it can't be generic. Okay, we're on to the next room. Sorry. Yeah, I've got it in there. So you've made this comment about the presumed thermal insulation in the inaccessible ceiling void. From the report, you've only found it in one location. Is it viable to suggest that we're going to have that kind of debris in every single ceiling void, be it where you didn't access it? For us, that every item that you create on that report is another item that goes in my asbestos register. It's something else I have to manage. It's something else I have to justify to the duty holders of why have we got a high risk debris item that we haven't actioned. You know, should it just go in as a limitation rather than a presumption? On what basis would you do that? And the recommendation, take immediate steps to control access to this material. Well, you couldn't get in the ceiling void. So what actions do I actually need to take with regard to this item that may in that location? Okay, so again, we're on to the third floor corridor here. You've not given me any description about the ceiling. I said before the importance. So you've mentioned what the walls are, what the floor is, but there's no description about what the ceiling is at all. That's really important information to me. It might seem a small thing. It's not asbestos. It's not important. But if I need to put signage up, new lighting, things like that, I really need to understand what the ceiling structure is made of to be able to make a decision about, do I need another survey or not? And this one over here, again, we've got a cleaner's sluice room. Again, I suspect we don't have carpet in there. Typically, there are vinyl spaces too. And again, there's no description of what the ceiling is, but we have got a sample in there. This insulation residue, that's great. From the picture, I'm assuming it's to pipework, but is it in the ceiling void? Is it in a riser? Is it in a floor trench? You've not given me a lot of description for me to be able to locate where it is in the space. Stop talking now. That's
what you need to do.
Bring the experts, right? What are they called? Explosive aim. Get them back. So you need to give me enough description about what that is. And again, reduce risk by removal, encapsulation, isolation, or repair. I mean, which one is it? I know that, you know, we look to you as our consultants to give us advice about which one it is. We know sometimes there'll be more than one option, but some of your clients might not understand quite as well as us. Perhaps you consider less generic and more specific where there is a definite action. And if it's in such bad condition, maybe we want to restrict access as a priority immediately as being something that we'd look to straight away. But give us that many options. I mean, which one are we expected to do? So where are we here now? Okay, again, we're lacking a ceiling description. But you found the 2 asbestos items in the room, that's great, but they were found to contain amosite and Christ tile. Brilliant. Are they insulating boards or are they cement? That makes a massive difference to what we're going to do with them and how we're going to manage them and deal with them. And it's got an assessment score of 6. Is that for both items? Is it just for one item? You've classed them both the same there. Were they sampled separately? They're very different materials in different applications. Are they going to be exactly the same? Again, we need that level of detail. In the other room, again, no ceiling description. And for these items, you've suggested that we label and manage them. As part of our management plan, we don't label any asbestos. It's not one of the management options that we utilise. So you're giving us a recommendation which isn't in line with how we manage asbestos across our sites. So we would never take that recommendation anyway. But do we have to action it because you've told us in the report as the consultants who offer us the advice? Or would there be another alternative that's viable? Right, the negative column. Okay, again, there's no picture with this sample. Where is it? It's very limited information. For us, it's equally as important to have almost as much information about negative items as it is about positive asbestos items, particularly in a room where you've got multiple columns. I mean, was it just one? Is there more than one in there? Are there different materials around each? Needing to know information about what the extent is as well and where it is, be able to locate it perfectly. And this one here, the stairs. So in all the other instances where we've got a solid ceiling, you've made a presumption about the thermal insulation above it, but we've got the same kind of ceiling here and you haven't presumed it. If that's a genuine thing that you think is existing, do we need to have that presumption in this room as well? Why has this one not got it and the other ones have? And then finally, so the basement boiler room, it doesn't have a room reference. That's really useful. But why does the basement appear at the end of the report when it's at the bottom of the building? You've gone in ground floor first, then second, then first, second, third, but we've got the basement coming at the end. Quite a lot of the time we read through a report and expect it in a logical order and things so we can find the information that we're looking for, but why is it there? And again, for a plant space, the room description is so basic. Does that mean you've not checked these things because you've not listed them, talked about the pipework and the plant in there? Playing devil's advocate, do I think maybe you've not seen it? Have you not assessed it? It gives me doubts as a client to think, have you considered those areas as having asbestos in them? And obviously the picture, it doesn't look a lot like asbestos gaskets to me. It's some ventilation ducting. And throughout, as a measurement, that's really tricky for us. Routine maintenance to plant areas. It might be somebody working on a steam pipe system where there might be asbestos gaskets, but sometimes there's ventilation plant in there and they've got pumps that have gaskets on as well, but they were only put in 20 years ago. Do they have asbestos gaskets too? Lots of different shapes and sizes. Having the quantification of being throughout makes it very difficult for me to do any work with an in-house maintenance team. And every job we've got to get an asbestos contractor in to split a flange and do a gasket based on the information there. And finally, mastic to windows. Should we be sticking labels on the outside of our building where all the mastic is? It's not something that's going to survive even if it was a process that we followed in-house. But as well, quite a lot of the time, if we work on an individual window, it won't be an external job. It will be something that's done internally. We'll get somebody to take one window out from in one room. So really, we need to have that information in every single room on a register. So when somebody looks at that room to consider doing something to the window, they have the information attributed to that space where they'll be working, because otherwise they might not find it. And if we have recommendations to encapsulate gaskets, I don't know if you've ever tried to remove an encapsulated gasket. It makes it a much riskier job than if it hadn't been encapsulated in the first place. We don't necessarily have to have actions attributed to every asbestos item if it's not necessary. This is one of my favourites. It used to come back all the time. We used to have a number of risers where we'd have AIB shuttering at the top of the riser. And the surveyors would often presume it because it was so difficult to access to take a sample unless they had a gadget arm that they could squirt up in the air and get a hold of it. But they'd look at it and they decided it was unsealed. How many times do you think we got recommendations telling us to paint these AIB soffits that nobody could get at to take a sample? It's just like, think about the recommendations you make, think about the practicality of can we actually achieve that? Because as soon as you tell me it exists as something that I'm supposed to action or have to have a trail of paperwork justifying why I've not taken the advice of an asbestos consultant and done something different if anybody came to question me. Live electrics as well. Yeah, really tricky. Presume asbestos to be present. If you do presume it, make a reasonable presumption about what it might be. It's not going to be spray coating inside an electrical box. If it looks modern, it's unlikely to have it in. We just want you to be reasonable and measured and think about the way that you say these things to us. So basically, it's important to think about not just how easy it is for you to tell us the information, but what we need and how we use that information as a client. It's very easy, and I know it's a competitive industry. You know, lots of reports are automatically generated. You've got to have a quick turnaround. I get that. It was discussed here. But is the easiest way for you the right way for your clients? Think about how we'll use the information at the end that you give us. It is for managing asbestos. We're the ones who have to reiterate everything that you give us, talk to all our colleagues, our staff, our maintenance teams, and be able to give it to them and believe in it with absolute faith that it is accurate and true. So that was a management survey, because we don't have any issues with refurbishment surveys at all. So these are real scoping examples from the last 5 years. So it's a refurbishment to specified areas only. Okay, that's great. What were they? If you don't see an area in the report, consider it outside the scope of what we were asked to do, which is great, but what if there was some kind of mistake and it got omitted for data collection reasons, whatever it might be? And a favourite, as instructed by the project manager on site. So there is no documented evidence of what anybody asked anybody to do. And obviously we still get people putting the wrong survey type on reports that get generated as well. As a client, what we want is detail. Ideally, we want to be able to reuse that report at some point in the future. We do a lot of quite light level refurbishment surveying, so it will be things for like cable runs for maybe CCTV systems, door control access, things like that. But don't just tell us it was a refurbishment survey to XYZ number of rooms. Give us some detail about what that work was, because those kind of light level surveys are really useful for us to reuse. Quite often we update our IT systems, and if we knew we had a refurbishment survey already done and it was for cable runs, things like that, that's something we could reuse for other schemes in the future. If you get a scoping form from your client, why not append it to the back of your report? If you get proposed plans from architects detailing change to layout, again, why not put those as appendices? But so many times we just don't see things like that put in a survey report for us at all. So in refurbishment surveys, This is a bit tricky because it's a bit like you can't win here sometimes, but quite often recommendations will be remove if they're going to be affected by the proposed works. It's a nice and general one. It kind of puts it back on the client, but quite often the client and our team members like project managers are looking for your input. They've explained to you what the scope of works is. They want you to tell them if you think that will be affected by the proposed works. So stick your neck out and say, based on the scope of works and the survey we did, we think that needs to be removed. So include it for removal. Don't just sit on the fence with it. Sometimes you quite often get everything gets removed. So this is the opposite end of the spectrum. We've done a refurb survey, you're doing refurbishments, get rid of it all, take it all out. So I have project managers coming back to me saying, do I need to remove the mastic from the external windows? We're only doing an internal refurbishment. We weren't doing any envelope works. Do we need to do that? No, we don't. But again, consider each individual item based on the scope. And the presumption of live or inaccessible areas. I get it as a client. We quite often hand over sites to you guys which are not dead. The services are in alive, and we understand that there will be limitations, there will be caveats. That's the nature of how we have to do a lot of our work ahead of any projects. But we really need you to tell us if there are any limitations and highlight that to us in no uncertain terms that there needs to be a revisit. Don't just hide it in the text of the report. Make sure you tell us that we couldn't get in this will affect your work, so you need to come back. The other thing is as well, quite often when we do refurbishment surveys, you don't have to do priority assessments. The assumption is it will be removed in the very near future as part of the scheme. Working for my organisation, we quite often do refurbishment surveys many, many months ahead of when we do the work on site. So we have to consider that a lot of the items you find, we're going to have to manage them for a significant period of time before it even gets handed over to a construction site as well. So does your client need to have different information that comes back to them as well as what's recommended for the removal? Do I need to add it to my asbestos register? Is it something I need to action immediately because it's really high risk and it's not going to wait 4 months till the construction company comes to site? Having information about where all the intrusions and opening up is also very valuable. Again, from an asbestos register perspective, you might go into a room and open up all the boxing and you don't find anything. But for me to be able to add that information to my register is massively valuable to make sure that I don't have to disrupt the people in that room again and get people back in the future. I can add that to my data and use it going forward. So in the executive summary, please highlight which items need action in and whether that's from an immediate perspective or from a project perspective. Define which ones can and can't remain, potentially based on your understanding of the scope of works. But consider us when you attribute timescales. We have a management plan. We have defined timescales in there to action things. Ask your clients if they have the same thing. If you're specifying 3 months, is that in line with the processes and procedures for the clients that you work at? But yeah, clearly recommend coming back where there are caveats and limitations because it's a really common thing for refurbishment schemes. But ultimately what we want are reports that are clear and unambiguous. That report there in the comments that we got back suggesting the limitations is not unambiguous in the slightest. Just clearly state what has been done, what hasn't been done. A lot of the reports that get undertaken at my organisation don't get issued directly to me or my team. They go to project managers. They need to be able to understand what you're saying. They are not asbestos professionals. You need to be able to explain it to people who don't do what we do for a living. It needs to be quite clear to those who are not asbestos specialists. Routine maintenance. I don't want to look at Sam when I say it's quite a tricky statement saying what routine maintenance is. It is a horribly generic term which is very, very difficult to apply to all places and all workspaces. But the number of times that panels are not unscrewed, where pipework boxing isn't accessed, things like that, They are the spaces that our maintenance team wants to get into more than anything else. If you look at a room and think, oh God, what would cause problems if it would break? The lighting, the heating, the water, the pipework, they are the things that typically maintenance guys need to get out all the time. But the number of times we have management surveys done where they don't consider the access panels to these bits of kit it's unbelievable. And a big one for us is caveats. We know they're unavoidable sometimes, it happens, but tell us about it and tell us about it before you leave site so we can try and do something about it if we possibly can. Quite often we get a report back and there's caveats that nobody knew about until the 2 weeks later when we're reviewing the report. So for us, good looks like a room-led report. When we look at your reports, that's typically what we do. We go to a room, we look at all the information for that room, and we'd like it all together. So any samples, any room descriptions, any limitations, all in the one place. That is the easiest way for us to use that report. Use those aids, they are really good for us. Having high quality photographs, not blurred, not a ceiling void shot where it's a picture of the underside of the ceiling. If you told me there's an item in it, I don't want to see the tiles, I want to see the item. That's what's important to us. But if you can have multiple photos per asbestos item, that is really useful. It's really good to have the close-up ones so we can actually see the condition it's in, if it's got damage, assess the debris, things like that. But one in context so we can be able to cite it, particularly where we've got large spaces too. High quality plans as well that are clear. If we issue your plans, they're really good. If you can do it on CAD, even better. But quite often survey reports, you'll just get an arrow centrally to the middle of the room. Where in the room is it? Particularly if it's a small item. Can you pinpoint it in that space? Can you colour code it? Can you show extents? They make it so much easier for us to manage things. And the next one as well, separate items in a room. I appreciate it's a lot of work for you guys, but if we've got 3 risers in one room, we might not have the ability at one time to clean all the asbestos debris out of all 3 of them. So we might just do one, so we've got a cable route that we can use, which you know is a clean route. But based on the register information, do we then categorise that as 3 risers, 2 risers, 1 riser? Identify the separate ones because we work separate risers, how we do our maintenance, how we do our installs. We wouldn't classify them as all being the same. So why should you classify them all as the same item in one report? Because that doesn't translate to how we would use the data. And standardisation of descriptions, scoring of items and recommendations. If you've got the same thing in the same building, in the same condition, score it and describe it the same because it presents the same risk typically to us. Recommendations, again, we'd expect them the same. And descriptions, anytime for us, we have to explain to our staff what asbestos items are. We do training with them about asbestos awareness. We train them how to use the register. If they see 1 million descriptions for a textile item in a room, it's hard enough to explain to them what a textile item is and what the risk it presents. But if you give them 1 million variations of how you describe that within the same building, they really start to question what it is. Can they be really clear about what they're dealing with and the risk?